Our freedoms and liberty have never been under assault like they are today, at least perhaps not since the American Revolution. And Josh Bernstein has written a book called Preserving Liberty: Bold and Brave Solutions to Save America. Josh, welcome back to The Truth.
Oh, it's great to be back on the program with you.
We seem to be under unrelenting assault. Is that just my imagination, or is this, in fact, a new phenomenon that has risen to gargantuan proportions?
Well, I would say this. I mean, look, I think, thank God, the good Lord above gave us a reprieve and gave us another shot to save this great nation. And of course, President Trump is doing everything that he can to facilitate that. But, there are certain forces still in place that are fighting against him. I mean, let's face it, the Democrats do not have control of the Senate, they do not have control of the House of Representatives. They really don't have any control at all. But Chuck Schumer did put 235 of these judges on these district courts, and they are definitely trying to impede the executive branch and President Trump, and they're trying to do something that unconstitutionally they are not allowed to do, which is to usurp the power of the executive branch and act as the kingmakers and basically, you know, uh, do injunctions throughout the entire country. And there are remedies for this. Of course, Speaker Johnson recently threatened that he could defund these courts. I think that is certainly a good step. But perhaps we need to go even further and actually use the Alien Enemies Act and declare war. Now, typically, Congress is the one that declares war. They say, the president says to Congress, hey, I want to declare war. Congress then does their thing. They vote on it. They vote to declare war, and now war is declared. However, through the executive privilege of the presidency, through inherent authority, if there is indeed an invasion into your country from outside forces, the president does have the right to bypass Congress and declare a declaration of war, which would then destroy the ability of these district judges to issue these injunctions. So, maybe that's the drastic measures that the Trump administration and the president will need to take.
Well, one of the disappointing things right now is that we've always sort of felt like the Supreme Court would be the final arbiter and that they would actually follow the Constitution and the laws of our country. But now they are taking the side of these activist judges, leading us very little opportunity other than the rather dramatic remedies that you just cited.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. Obviously, there's been an emergency petition this morning to the Supreme Court against this Boasberg character. And, I think it's important for people to understand some history here. If you remember in George W. Bush's term, in the beginning of his term, he actually had a situation where William Rehnquist, who was the Chief Justice at the time, passed away. And so there was an opening. And during that process, there was another opening through, I think it was Sandra Day O'Connor at that point. And what ended up happening was instead of making him an associate justice, he elevated him immediately to the Chief Justice. And then, of course, Samuel Alito filled in the next associate justice opening. So you have just John G. Roberts Jr., who was appointed to the Chief Justice. And he's always been a Trump hater, which is terrible. But more importantly, he is responsible, in my opinion, for the weaponization of the deep state. Why? Well, very simple. Because who appoints every single judge on the FISA court? It is the Chief Justice, John G. Roberts Jr., who appointed Boasberg. And so Boasberg was the one, along with the other 10 judges, that did the Carter Page spy warrants and, all the other crazy things with the Russia collusion garbage. And so he's responsible for it. And yet now we have to go to the Supreme Court with an emergency petition and hope and pray that he's going to take it, number one, and number two, do the right thing and do the right judging on it. It's a precarious position, to say the least.
The only problem I have with your idea of going in and using an act of war to declare against these judges, or using the Alien Enemies Act,
Mhm.
is that it just resets the bar another notch lower on the spectrum. And that's fine while we're in power, but when the Dems are in power, it doesn't feel like a very good idea to me.
Well, it's interesting because Elena Kagan in 2022 was put on record in an interview, and she was talking about the fact that these judges, and again, this is a different time because these were conservative judges that were trying to stop the Biden regime from doing things outside of the confines of the Constitution. But at that point, she said that these judges, and she was talking about conservative judges at the time, should not be able to do nationwide injunctions. It should only be, in that direct area in their district court, in their region, if you will. And so perhaps maybe she's going to be a vote for sanity if this case does go to the Supreme Court. What I'm worried about more than anything else is John Roberts kicking it back and saying, "Nah, let the next court, let the Court of Appeals, the DC court, let them have their shot at it first before we take a bite at this apple." And what happens at that point? We have more and more of these injunctions coming in, stopping President Trump's, mandate to make this country great again. And I think that needs to end and it needs to stop. So I am cautiously optimistic, but hopeful that he will accept this emergency ex parte to the Supreme Court and do the right thing and vacate these injunctions.
So some of the injunctions that we're talking about have been to deprive Donald Trump of being able to stop payments that were obligated under the USAID, and the judge evidently wants the payments to continue. They've also tried to stop him from removing people over the age of 150 on the Social Security rolls. They're also trying to stop him from deporting murderers, rapists, and robbers and sending them back to their home countries. I mean, these just seem to be insane measures to me that the courts are taking. I mean, if the President of the United States, the Commander in Chief, and the Chief Executive of the executive branch doesn't have the authority to remove probationary employees, to remove employees that don't return emails letting you know that they're even alive, let alone at work. And the list goes on. What rights or powers does the president have? It sounds like a perfect setup for a constitutional crisis to me.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think that's exactly where we are headed right now. But there are other remedies besides even the Alien Enemies Act would be one for obviously for deportation and things like that. But there are other fixes as far as these judges are concerned as well. You can stop the judges with the Alien Enemies Act. Yes, you can, because once that's declared, they're null. They're done. There's nothing that they can do at that point because it's an invasion and you're using your inherent authority to do so. But what also he could do is he could have a request. He can make the request to Congress using the Rescission Act. And he could say, look, I don't want you to spend money on X, Y, and Z. And if that money has not been spent yet or allocated, you can claw back, as they like to use those words, claw back that money and keep it from going to these agencies. What our problem in Washington has been is that Congress will appropriate these funds. That's wonderful. That's great. And then they give it to these agencies, and that's where the oversight stops. These agencies then take the money and they spend it accordingly to however they want to. That needs to end. We need to have more oversight when we are giving money to any of these agencies, if we don't hopefully close a lot of them out. But the ones that are left open, that's what needs to happen. There needs to be new rules based on tracking of this money so that it doesn't go to things that are nefarious or, transgendered mice in whatever country or whatever kind of silly things that we were talking about. I mean, I talk about it a lot in Preserving Liberty. I go through it, and chapter 5 is literally titled "Houston, We Have a Spending Problem," and I go through a lot of the crazy spending and things like that. And all it does is really validate what I wrote. And my book came out October 8th before the election, so we're starting to see a lot of the things that are happening, and it's eye-opening to say the least.
Well, and I'm not out of hand eliminating or rejecting the use of the Alien Enemies Act because we now have learned that there are 150,000 military age fit Chinese men that have crossed our boundaries, our borders, and have entered our country. And if that is not an act of aggression, I don't know what is, because the fact of the matter is nobody leaves or enters the communist country of China without permission of the CCP and involvement of them. So they know that these 150,000 men are living within our borders, and we need to identify them and round them up and send them back, if you ask me.
Yeah, and I think that that's what they're doing. I mean, they just busted a big one in California. Of course, they've taken the MS-13 leader that was living 30 miles away from the White House the other day. Ingratiating in our society, and so they're doing the best that they can. But then you have these judges that want to protect these violent gang members and criminals and things like that. But you are correct, because a lot of these Chinese dissidents, or these Chinese infiltrators, as I'll call them, they end up in our research facilities, in our universities, and they're stealing our intellectual property and our biological property. And then they learn from the best scientists here in America. And what do? They take that information and they bring it back to China, and they develop more biological weapons. So yes, I agree. The Thousand Talents program is probably something that should be eliminated. The other one, the Confucius Institute, should all be shut down. We cannot trust China to be doing things, in a good way. I talk about that in the China Syndrome in chapter 7, or is it 6? 6 or 7, I can't remember offhand. But I talk about a lot of that stuff, and how we've got to get off of Chinese-made goods and things like that. And the Chinese are getting smarter, because they don't say made in America, made in China anymore. They say made in the PRC. Well, for people that don't pay attention, PRC means People's Republic of China. Look at Temu and what it has done. It's knocked out the dollar stores 100%. It's taken over 15% away from Amazon's profits, because they can sell items 75% less than anywhere else. Why? Because they're not paying any labor costs, because it's all slave labor from the Zhejiang province of northwest China. So those are some of the things that I talk about in Preserving Liberty.
And there's no U.S. deterrent to bring those products into our country by the truckload. But come next Tuesday, that's about to end for the automobile industry. 25%
Yep.
tariffs are going to be imposed on people who import cars into our country. Can't come soon enough, as far as I'm concerned. People think that that's going to work against Tesla. I think that it's going to play right into Tesla's hands, frankly, because they've got plants in Fremont and Austin, Texas, whereas most of even the U.S. automakers, notably GM, Ford, and Stellantis, have much of their manufacturing offshore. So, what do you make of tariffs, and what do you see coming down the pike?
Well, I look at precedent, number one, and I look at success, number two. President Trump has already done this. I don't understand, this tariff porn out there trying to scare everybody, because again, it's already worked in his first term. So now he's just going to exacerbate it even more, and it's going to work that much more in his second term. So look, I think the overall reaching objective of putting these tariffs on, I mean, look, if you have a product and the other country is charging 200% and you're charging 2%, yeah, that's not fair. And so what he wants to do is he wants to do reciprocity. He wants to have the same amount of tariffs. But here's what I think is going to happen. I think eventually they're all going to work out a deal and there won't be any tariffs. But you need to kind of have this attitude of, hey, we're going to make it at least reciprocal and even. And then they're going to start realizing, wait a minute, you know what? This is stupid. Why don't we just have real free trade and not have tariffs at all? And I think both countries at that point would prosper from that. So I think in the end, that's what the quote unquote art of the deal, or the art of the trade deal, is really all about.
Well, you may be right. The market yesterday didn't react that way. It was down 3%, and the market and markets have been really scared and running for the hills. But meanwhile, Stellantis has announced a $5 billion investment in its U.S. manufacturing. Volkswagen is considering shifting production of the high-end Audi and Porsche brands back to the U.S. Honda is producing its next generation of Civic hybrid models in Indiana. Nissan is considering moving production from Mexico to the U.S. Goes on. Rolls-Royce is expected
Even
to ramp up
Rolls-Royce, imagine
production in the U.S. by hiring more U.S. auto workers. And Volvo is considering expanding its U.S. based output. Notably absent from this list are Ford and GM, but it does continue onto the back page, so maybe there is mention of them, but I don't see them here with the automakers. But that is going to have a tremendous stimulus to our U.S. economy. It appears to me that Trump is actually in the process of reconstructing our entire U.S. economy.
Yeah, I call it short-term pain for long-term gain. I think people need to understand that this year, pretty much for the rest of this year, it's going to be tough. This economy is not going to be much better. And I think by maybe, if we get lucky, maybe by October, November of this year, we might start seeing some of the fruits of those labors. But I think come 2026, first quarter, we are going to see the greatest economy we have ever seen in U.S. history. You can mark that down. I can come back then and we can discuss whether it's true or not. But I really, truly do feel as though once all of this kind of takes place in the market, and it takes, 90, 120, maybe even longer, 180 days to kind of run through its circle. And once the markets level out and realize that all of these gains were for good and not for hurting businesses and small businesses and manufacturing and all that, I think some of that fear is going to go away from the market. And again, I'm not a market guru by any stretch. I'm a political analyst. But I do feel as though 2026 is going to be just a rock solid year.
Maybe the golden age, but when you take $1 trillion of wasteful spending out of the federal government and you can offset that with investments from all these different companies in the U.S., like Apple, for instance, which is going to invest $500 billion in the U.S. These numbers are staggering. And as unemployment starts to drop from 4% to under 3.5%, 3.2, 3.3 is considered effective full employment. Interest rates start to tick down, and the Trump tax reforms and tax cuts are made permanent. I agree with you. I think the good old days are going to be back and in full swing.
Yeah, and look, he just endorsed Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham is the epitome of a rhino establishment Republican. But if you look at his endorsement and you kind of decipher it and read through it, you can clearly see why he did this. Number one, he's the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, so he's going to need his vote to get through these the tax cuts, making them permanent, as well as codifying the Doge cuts at some point here in the near future. But he's also a ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that he can stop some of these frivolous investigations and things like that, as well as if there is an opening on the United States Supreme Court, he can make sure that the choice, whoever it may be, will get through the nomination process as well. So I understand why conservatives are upset and the MAGA base is losing their minds over endorsing Lindsey Graham. But from a strategic standpoint, I understand why him and his advisors did that. But let me just add this. I think the best entire, cabinet member, in my opinion, is Howard Lutnick. I think he is the hidden gem and the brains behind a lot of this stuff. The gold cards were his idea. The External Revenue Service was his idea. Even half of Doge was his idea. So I really like the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. I think he's one of the hidden gems of the cabinet. He's talked recently about the Constitution pipeline. I don't know if the people in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine want their gas prices to be, half of what they are now. Then they ought to make sure that they do this Constitution pipeline. Hopefully he doesn't have to use eminent domain to get it done. It seems like every state except New York is the only one that's not on board, but apparently they're still working and negotiating that. But if he can get that done, my goodness, you want to talk about energy prices? Not to mention, we won't have to worry about Canada and their threats because we'll have as much energy as he calls it. What does he call it? Liquid gold underneath his feet. And so I think there's a lot of things that people aren't paying attention to, not to mention the gold cards. I mean, they said he already sold 1,000 of them the first week. Think of how much money that's going to bring in to pay down the national debt and things like that. So, like I said, I think people need to strap in, hold on tight, because it's going to be a bumpy ride, but it's going to smooth out in the beginning of 2026.
Well, I think your analysis is spot on, and I cannot wait. And I'm taking a real hit in the market right now when I don't need to be
Yeah.
or want to be. But like you say, it's worth it. Short-term pain for long-term gain. You can make this press release in about 5 minutes, but it's going to take 6 to 12 months to actually see the investment starting to pay off in the economy. And so I share your optimism and enthusiasm. One of the problems that Trump is going to have, in addition to a very mixed bag in Congress, I mean, while we've got a Republican majority, as you point out, we've also got a lot of rhinos, maybe
Yes.
predominantly in the Congress. But the deep state is a real phenomenon in our country. It's really, for the most part, institutionalized. It is permanent Washington, as they call it. And that is where the executive orders have to be executed. Is Trump going to be able to get these marshaled through? And are we going to be able to see the benefits from the orders that he's already delivered, over 350 of them in just a scant 2.5 months?
Yeah. Look, any other time, if you saw a new president come in and issue 350 executive orders in the first couple of months, I'd be pulling out what hair I don't have left on my head, right? I'd be freaked out about that. But we do understand why he's done it. There's been so much damage the last 4 years that he has to undo a lot of that damage. But remember, people need to understand that right now, none of this stuff is codified. And what we don't want to happen is to play political whack-a-mole, where the next administration comes in and they undo everything that Trump did to Biden, and then whoever that would be to do to Trump. And that's why I named my book, Preserving Liberty, Bold and Brave Solutions to Save America and Create what? Permanent freedom. I explain in my book exactly how you can codify a lot of this stuff, and even getting around, you know, governors that are left-leaning, or Democrat governors and things like that, attorney generals, by taking it and bringing it directly to the people. Congressman Paul Gosar, good buddy of mine from the Freedom Caucus, did the forward to it. I created 10 different legislative ideas that he could then take and introduce into Congress as well. And by the way, you can get it on Amazon. The copies are, the digital is $12.99 and the hard copy is $24.99. But, you know, a lot of what we're talking about, we have to codify. Otherwise, what we have is astroturf, let's face it, right? Because we don't have anything codified yet. So I think there's two things that they absolutely have to do by 2026. One thing that I would do is I would immediately do another executive order, and I would create the Department of Election Integrity. That's what I would do first, immediately. He should have done that on January 20th. He didn't, for whatever reason. Then what I would do is I would work diligently on getting two things done. Number one, codifying 50 states mandatory voter ID, and codifying no illegal aliens allowed to vote in our elections. If we did just those two things, and again, there's plenty more in the book explaining how we can, you know, take care of our elections. But even just doing those two things, you have eliminated at least 45 to 50% of all the voter fraud right from that alone.
Well, I
As
would
far as
add
the
to your.
deep state, as far as the deep state being entrenched, selling off 70% of all the buildings in Washington that the majority are vacant and empty is a great way to shrink down the swamp as well, because you won't have any place to put them. Which means that once we fire all these people and clear out the government, you're not going to be able to put them back in because the buildings will have been sold. So I think that's another strategic point here. But more importantly, as great as Doge is and Elon Musk and things like that, I hate to say it, it's not about waste, fraud, and abuse. You know what it's about? It's about what's going to happen next. It's about what they are finding. Remember, when these Doge guys went in there, what's the first thing that Elon Musk instructed them to do? lock everybody out. They can't get keywords, they can't get passwords, they can't get usernames, they can't log in, nothing. It's been shut down. Why? Because all the incriminating evidence and crimes is now in the hands of the Doge. And remember, they've gone into less than what? I think 30 agencies, and there's 438 total agencies of the federal government. So you've got another 400 more to go. Look at what they found already. Could you just imagine what they're going to find moving forward? So again, I'm very, very optimistic on the point that it's really not about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. It's about prosecuting these people, these bad actors, these members of Congress, these members of the Senate, these deep state officials, these judges that are part of these NGOs and USAID and all the rest of them. It's about doing that. Now, the question is, does President Trump have the testicular fortitude to instruct his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to prosecute hundreds of thousands of these people? If you want to clear out the deep state, this is the way to do it. That is something to be remain to be seen.
So I would add to your list on election integrity that we better control the use of absentee ballots. This notion
Absolutely.
of just handing out thousands, hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots has got to stop. And I think that the prior rule that it was for elderly, people who are infirm, out of the country, in military service, those sorts of exemptions should qualify for an absentee ballot. Otherwise, get your butt out of bed and go and vote like the rest of us do. And that's not voter suppression. That is respecting the franchise that we have the privilege of exercising in this country. It's a small ask, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it doesn't say that you have a constitutional right to vote, dot, 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 by mail. Nothing in the Constitution
No.
says you have a right to vote by mail. And so we don't need voting season, okay? I would say at a maximum, and I talk about it in my book, Preserving Liberty, in Chapter 3, Balancing the Electorate, which is basically getting rid of HAVA, getting rid of CISA. These are all components for voter fraud. But also, we have to make sure that votes are counted in the county in which the vote has been cast, not in Spain or Portugal or Venezuela or wherever it may be, and then reported back with a wink wink and a nod nod that this person really won and this is what the votes really are. We obviously want to get rid of these machines. That's another thing that I talk about as well. But you're right. We have to get rid of these voting seasons and these early voting and these no-fault absentee ballots, because look what it did in 2020. And so the only reason that President Trump was able to win this election is because the RNC was proactive, not reactive, meaning that they were basically seeing things that were fraudulent. Maybe Jocelyn Benson in Michigan says, don't worry about your signature matching, that's okay, it doesn't have to match what's on the envelope. And they said, sorry, no, I don't think so. And they filed 120 lawsuits, including 80 of them in the 7 swing states. And the judges took the cases. Why? Because there were no votes cast yet. So they were very smart to understand to not wait until afterwards, like they did in 2020, where the judges didn't want to be the arbiters of the election, and they took themselves out and said you didn't have standing. That's one reason why President Trump was able to win, because they filed so many proactive lawsuits to stop the fraud in real time.
Well, while we're taming this bureaucracy, I think we've got to tame the intelligence community. I want the answers to the questions that we've been promised, i.e., give us the Epstein files, give us all of the JFK files. I understand that there's still 2,400 documents at the FBI that they've not shared with us. God only knows what the CIA has or has shredded by now. I'd like to know about Building 7 in the 9/11 attacks. And while we're at it, why aren't we subpoenaing Ray Epps and his bank records to find out whose payroll was he on January the 6th? And did Michael Byrd get an order from anyone to shoot Ashley Babbitt, which may be one of the greatest atrocities I've ever witnessed on live television in this entire country? I think this federal government, that there are elements of it that are absolutely rotten to the core, and it's a cancer growing inside of the government, and until we surgically eradicate and remove it, we will never have the moral authority to lead the world. That's my paradigm. I'll give you the last word, Josh.
Well, I would say a couple things. Number one, out of all the things that we're talking about, from the JFK files to Epstein list to everything else, wouldn't you think that if someone tried to assassinate you, maybe on day one you'd want that released first? Who in Butler set up the entire assassination and those documents? I don't understand why no one's talking about that. No one's even asking the president about that. If I was president and I came in on day one, I would tell my cabinet and everyone, I don't care about anything else. I don't care about Doge. I don't care about. I want to know who tried to kill me in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th, 2024. Where are those documents? As far as JFK is concerned, look, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I don't think the American people can handle the fact that a sitting president, JFK, was assassinated by his vice president, LBJ, with the help of his intelligence community, the CIA. Okay? I'll say it publicly.
You do or
if you
do
look
not?
at all the documents, it all points directly to LBJ and the CIA.
100%.
100%.
I mean,
LBJ's chief
you-
of staff and close advisor was Clifton Carter. Clifton Carter was also the head of the DNC at that time. He hired Malcolm Mack Wallace as an assassin to take out JFK because he always wanted to be president himself. I think the CIA helped him because, of course, we want to smash the CIA into 1,000 little pieces speech. And so I think that was a big part of it. And I do believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy. He was a terrible shot. There was no gun residue on his shoulder, on his face, on his cheek, on nothing. And what about Ruth Payne and Michael Payne? That's not part of the paperwork. So yes, you are correct.
Well,
There
Ruth
are
Payne lives
thousands
right
of
out there
papers.
next door to you. She's still living in California.
She's 93
I think
years old.
I think they should go and put her under oath and ask her some questions because she
Amen.
supposedly was a CIA operative, and George de Mohrenschildt was assassinated just 5 miles from where I'm sitting right here. He was allegedly Oswald's CIA handler. And we could spend an entire program on JFK.
We probably could.
Well, and our listeners have heard it from me for the last 3 years. They have also heard about Butler, Pennsylvania every week for the last 6 months because I'm not going to let it go. I am right there with you. Let's find out who tried to shoot and kill Donald J. Trump on July the 13th. Now, here's one for you, Josh.
Sure.
Maxwell Urich, his parents live in Mesa, Arizona. He drove a white van to Butler. It was titled to Urich Munitions, which his parents own. They sell ammunition and armaments to third world countries and had a relationship with the CIA. Maxwell Urich was named as a suspect in the moments immediately following the attempted assassination. If you look at the guy on the roof, you can see scars on his ear. Thomas Maxwell Crooks had no gauges, had no scars, but Maxwell Urich did. The day after the attempted assassination, Urich's parents filed a missing persons report on him. He has not been seen or heard of since. And as we know, we saw someone washing DNA off the roof of the AGR building 2 hours after the attempted assassination. And the body of the would-be assassin was cremated 10 days later. If it was Crooks, they didn't bother to inform or ask his parents. So that's a rabbit hole that I think absolutely demands that we go down, and I'm not letting it rest, and I'm glad to hear that you share my angst and passion for getting
look,
to the
just
truth.
like Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy, so was Thomas Matthew Crooks, in my opinion.
I'm right
and
there
I have
with you.
I could point fingers, I won't say publicly, but I could point fingers at exactly who I believe ordered the hit. So I'll tell you maybe in text message, not over the air.
Well, can you give us a hint? I mean, how syllables?
Well, who would be in charge?
Sounds like...
Who would be in charge of the security detail for all candidates at the time, and who was extremely close to what's her name, Cheadle or whatever her name, the one that was the head of the Secret Service detail at that time.
I think you're pointing a finger at Ronald Rutrow.
Nope. definitely not. But I will say this: that Cheadle was the security detail for this person and her husband when they were VP. I'll leave it at that. You can figure out the rest.
Oh, and I was looking forward to a nice, restful afternoon, and now it sounds like I'm going to be on Google. Thank you, Josh
Well, who do
Bernstein.
you think's been running the fake White House all those years?
Oh, that would be Barack Obama. Or maybe Dr. Jill, who ain't no doctor. Or maybe just poor little Hunter. I don't know. Or maybe it's a triumvirate. And
You said it.
yeah,
You said it. They can't see it because we're on video, but you said it.
yeah. Well, thank you, Josh, author of Preserving Liberty, Bold and Brave Solutions to Save America and Create Permanent Freedom. I like it.
Yep.
And I want you to
Yep.
come back soon and often.
Anytime, any topic, just like I said to Dr. Drew just a couple of days ago. So I'd be happy to discuss any topic, doesn't matter what it is. And folks, you can also follow me on at Real JBU Show, at Real JBU Show on X. I'm pretty much banned from every other platform other than X. And so, yeah, Preserving Liberty on Amazon. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you very much, Josh. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you.